There is a version of a Tuesday evening that many men in this situation know well. The work is done, the house is full, the people who matter most are in the same rooms. And there is a specific kind of absence, quiet, invisible, impossible to explain, where presence should be. Not hostility, not checked out, not even tired in a way that has a name. Just not there. And the strange part is the awareness of it. The man in this situation knows it. He watches himself manage the evening from a distance. He knows what engaged looks like, and knows this isn't it, and cannot close the gap. Here is what this video is about. That gap is not a relationship problem. It is not a willpower problem. It is a biological output, and it has a mechanism that can be named. Let's start with what's actually happening in the body of a man who runs sustained high-performance work. The stress response system, the HPA axis, is designed for short-duration threat response. Cortisol spikes. The body mobilizes resources, the threat resolves, cortisol drops. That's the design. The problem is that executive-level work doesn't give you the resolution signal. The inbox doesn't empty. The decisions don't stop arriving. The accountability loop doesn't close at 5 p.m., so cortisol doesn't drop. It runs chronically elevated, not at crisis levels, but at a low, sustained ceiling that the system wasn't designed to maintain indefinitely. Here is what is actually happening. Cortisol and testosterone share a precursor hormone called pregnenolone. When the body is under chronic demand, it allocates that precursor toward cortisol production because the perceived threat is ongoing. This is called the pregnenolone steal, and it runs silently. No alarm, no lab flag, no dramatic symptom. Just a slow, measurable suppression of testosterone at the source. And testosterone is not just a physical hormone. It is the biological substrate of approach behavior, the drive toward engagement, reward, connection. When it drops below a functional threshold, approach behavior drops with it. What that looks like from the outside is a man who is physically present and relationally absent. What it feels like from the inside is a flatness that has no story attached to it. No event caused it, no decision produced it. It is simply the output of a system running at chronic cortisol load, with the neurochemical capacity for presence already spent before the front door opens. That is what the gap is, not a character verdict, a biological output. Here's a question worth sitting with. If the problem were simply a matter of intention, of deciding to show up differently, why doesn't deciding to show up differently work? Most men in this situation have tried. Put the phone face down. Committed to being present at dinner. Had the conversation with themselves on the drive home. It holds for a week, sometimes two. Then the flatness returns, and the effort required to perform presence becomes one more performance layered on top of the one already running all day. Here is the mechanism. Relational presence is neurochemically expensive. It requires oxytocin throughput, the bonding hormone, which supports attunement and warmth. It requires dopamine availability, the reward signal that makes engagement feel worth it. It requires a nervous system that is not actively managing threat. A man running chronic cortisol load has already spent most of that budget before the workday ends. By the time the evening arrives, the neurochemical substrate that presence is built on is depleted. Trying harder is a behavioral intervention applied to a biological deficit. It works until the willpower runs out, which, in a depleted system, isn't long. This is the precise reason that the standard advice, communicate more, be more vulnerable, put the phone down, choose to engage, produces the loop it produces. The information is correct, the container is wrong. You cannot behavioral protocol your way out of a cortisol-driven neurochemical depletion. The problem is not that he isn't trying. The problem is that trying is the wrong intervention for a biological problem. This is a system problem, which means it has system solutions. Now consider what this looks like from the other side of the room. The partner of a man in this situation is not experiencing neglect in any simple, nameable way. It is not coldness. It is not resentment. Or, at least, not only resentment. It is something more disorienting than either of those. It is the experience of living with a man who is obviously still performing, going to work, managing logistics, holding the infrastructure of the household together, but who feels like a stranger to himself. She is not responding to who he is. She is responding to what this system is producing. That is not the same thing. And that distinction matters. because she doesn't have the map either. She experiences the withdrawal as a relationship signal, as information about how he feels about her, about whether she is still wanted, about whether the marriage has become, somewhere along the way, a functional arrangement rather than an actual partnership. This is the specific cruelty of the biological mechanism. It produces relational distance that reads like emotional choice. The research on chronic stress and pair bond behavior shows a consistent pattern. Men in sustained high cortisol states show measurable reductions in what researchers call pro-social signaling, the small, frequent bids for connection that healthy relationships run on. Eye contact. Physical initiation. The brief, unremarkable moments of acknowledgement that partners use to maintain the bond. These are not grand gestures. They are the low-level maintenance signals that tell a partner, "I see you, I'm here, this is still real." A man running chronic cortisol load stops producing those signals, not because he no longer means them, but because the system that generates them is already taxed past its available budget. She reads the absence of those signals the way any human being would, as information. As change. Here is the reframe that matters. The distance is not who he is, it is what the system is producing. And because it is a system output, not a character output, it has inputs that can be changed. If this has named something specific, if the mechanism is clear, but the question of what to actually do with it is now open, there is a structured framework in the description built around exactly this problem. The relational reconnection protocol works from the biological layer first. Not communication exercises, not therapy-adjacent language. A 21-day implementation that begins with the cortisol depletion cycle and builds toward reconnection in stages the system can actually sustain. Link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Let's talk about one concrete thing. Not a protocol, not a system overhaul. One lever that addresses the biology before the behavior. The research on executive performance and parental presence consistently surfaces a specific intervention, the decompression window. Not a long one, 15 to 20 minutes between the end of the workday and the beginning of the home environment. During that window, no inputs, no catching up on messages, no planning the evening, no processing the day. The goal of the window is a measurable cortisol reduction before entering relational space. Research on cortisol recovery patterns in high-demand professionals shows that a genuine sensory break, no screens, no conversation, no task engagement, produces a measurable drop in cortisol within 15 minutes. That is not a large number. It is not a life-restructuring commitment. It is a 15-minute investment that changes the biological state the evening begins from. And the second lever, which works in parallel, is physical initiation without emotional requirement. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone depleted by chronic cortisol load, is triggered by physical contact. Brief, non-demanding physical contact. Not a performance of intimacy. Not a conversation about connection. A hand on the shoulder. A pause before sitting down. Physical proximity initiated deliberately, for 30 seconds, without an agenda attached to it. The biology doesn't require the emotional availability to be present first. It produces some of it in response. That sequence, decompression window, then brief physical initiation, is the two-lever entry point into the reconnection cycle. It doesn't require a difficult conversation. It doesn't require disclosing what has been happening internally. It requires a 15-minute buffer and a deliberate hand on a shoulder. This is not a cure. It is a first input change. And input changes, when applied to the right lever, shift the system output. The framework for building on this, including the 21-day implementation and the biological sequence underneath it, is in the description. Link is also in the pinned comment. What was the moment you realized the distance in your house wasn't something you were choosing? And when did that become clear to you? What you now know is this. The withdrawal is not a character output. It is not the accumulation of small decisions not to show up. It is not what the marriage is becoming. It is a biological system under specific pressures that have a name, a mechanism, and a set of inputs that can be changed. The man who understands this is no longer managing guilt with no useful target. He has something more valuable than guilt. He has a map. The distance his partner has been feeling is not information about the future of the relationship. It is information about the biological state of the system that produces relational behavior. And biological states respond to inputs, not to inspiration. Not to deciding to care more, to inputs, the decompression window. The physical initiation. the measurable cortisol reduction that precedes any genuine attempt at connection. These are not romantic interventions. They are biological ones, which means they work when the emotional availability isn't there yet and build some of it in the process. The man at 48 who understands that the flatness he has been carrying is not who he is, but what a depleted system produces, that man is not in decline. He is in transition. And the transition has a direction. It begins with a 15-minute buffer and a hand on his shoulder. The rest follows from the first input.